Why do the world's most powerful nations, the United States, China, India, and even Europe, all compete for influence over a tiny island nation with no natural resources? How did Singapore, a country smaller than many global cities, become one of the most strategically important places on Earth? At first glance, Singapore looks like a financial paradise, a clean city, and a global travel destination. But behind the skyscrapers and shipping ports lies something far more powerful: geopolitical leverage. Singapore doesn't dominate through military might or population size. Instead, it controls access, stability, and trust in one of the most contested regions in the world. In a century defined by trade wars, naval tensions, supply chain disruptions, and power shifts from the west to east, Singapore has quietly positioned itself as the ultimate middleman. Every superpower needs Singapore, not as an ally, not as an enemy, but as a neutral anchor that keeps the global system running. In this video, we will uncover why Singapore has become the hidden geopolitical hub of the modern world, how it balances giants without choosing sides, and why losing Singapore's cooperation would be a strategic disaster for any superpower. Point 1. Singapore controls the world's most critical trade routes. Singapore sits beside the Strait of Malacca, one of the most important maritime choke points on the planet. Nearly 40% of global trade and a massive portion of the world's oil shipments pass through this narrow stretch of water every single day. Whoever influences this region doesn't just affect Asia, they affect the global economy. For superpowers like China, the United States, and Japan, uninterrupted access to this route is non-negotiable. China's energy imports from the Middle East rely heavily on Malacca. The U.S. Navy depends on free navigation here to maintain its Indo-Pacific presence. Europe's supply chains depend on it for goods moving between East and West. Singapore's power comes from ensuring stability without militarizing dominance. It provides world-class port infrastructure, anti-piracy coordination, and logistics efficiency, all without threatening any side. This makes Singapore indispensable. Unlike unstable regions where control invites conflict, Singapore offers predictability. Superpowers trust Singapore because it has never weaponized its position. Instead, it acts as a neutral guardian of global commerce. If Singapore were to collapse politically or choose sides militarily, global shipping costs would skyrocket overnight. That risk alone ensures that every major power has a vested interest in Singapore's continued stability and independence. Point 2. Singapore is the financial nervous system of Asia. Singapore is not just a port, it is Asia's financial command center. Trillions of dollars flow through its banks, investment firms, and wealth management institutions. From Chinese capital to American funds to Middle Eastern sovereign wealth, Singapore is where global money feels safest. What makes Singapore unique is trust. Strong laws, zero tolerance for corruption, political stability, and transparent regulation have turned it into a neutral vault for the world's wealth. In an era where sanctions, freezes, and financial warfare are common, Singapore offers a rare zone of predictability. For China, Singapore is a gateway to global finance without Western hostility. For the US and Europe, it is a stable base in Asia that respects international rules. For emerging economies, it is a launchpad into global markets. No superpower wants Singapore to fail financially because its collapse would send shockwaves across currencies, investments, and global confidence. This financial centrality gives Singapore quiet leverage. It doesn't threaten, it anchors. When markets panic, Singapore reassures. When capital flees uncertainty, it runs toward Singapore. That makes it economically untouchable and geopolitically essential. Point 3. Singapore's military neutrality is its greatest weapon. Singapore maintains one of the most advanced militaries in Southeast Asia, yet it never seeks conflict. This balance is deliberate. It hosts U.S. naval assets, conducts exercises with China, cooperates with India, and maintains strong ties with Europe without formally aligning against anyone. This strategic neutrality makes Singapore invaluable. Superpowers trust Singapore because it does not act as a proxy. Instead, it acts as a stabilizer. In tense moments, Singapore becomes a safe meeting ground rather than a battlefield. Unlike countries forced to choose sides, Singapore chooses competence. Its military exists to protect sovereignty, not to project ideology. This reassures all major players. If Singapore were weak militarily, it would invite domination. If it were aggressive, it would provoke hostility. Instead, it has mastered deterrence without provocation, a rare skill in geopolitics. Every superpower benefits from this balance. Singapore's strength ensures no rival can easily control it, while its restraint ensures no power feels threatened by it. Point 4. Singapore is the diplomatic bridge between East and West. When global leaders need a neutral, respected location to negotiate, Singapore often emerges as the first choice. From security dialogues to economic summits, Singapore functions as a diplomatic bridge connecting competing worlds. Its leaders speak the language of both Western liberal systems and Eastern pragmatic governance. This allows Singapore to translate interests rather than escalate conflicts. In an era of rising polarization, Singapore offers something rare: credibility without bias. Superpowers listen because Singapore doesn't lecture, it facilitates. This diplomatic capital cannot be built overnight. It is the result of decades of consistency, competence, and credibility. Losing Singapore as a neutral platform would leave a dangerous vacuum in global diplomacy. Point 5. Singapore's stability makes it a global insurance policy. In a world of coups, trade wars, and collapsing states, Singapore represents the opposite: long-term stability. This stability makes it a global insurance policy for superpowers. Supply chains are routed through Singapore because it is reliable. Corporations base regional headquarters there because laws don't change overnight. Militaries cooperate with Singapore because it doesn't flip alliances. Every superpower needs at least one place in Asia that will not implode under pressure. Singapore fills that role perfectly. If chaos spreads, Singapore becomes the fallback. If systems fail elsewhere, Singapore absorbs the shock. That function alone guarantees its importance for decades to come. Singapore's true power lies not in domination, but in indispensability. It doesn't shout, it doesn't threaten, it doesn't conquer. Yet every superpower plans its strategies with Singapore in mind. In a century where power is shifting, alliances are fragile, and trust is rare, Singapore has mastered the art of being needed by everyone and owned by no one. That is why it survives where others fall. That is why it thrives where others struggle. The world may argue over who leads the future, China or the United States, but one thing is already clear: neither can afford to lose Singapore. And perhaps that is the most powerful position any nation can hold.